Hello, welcome to a new episode of Rants with Danny Shi. Today is Saturday, February 21st, just a couple of weeks out from the World Baseball Classic. And before we go into an interview, let's hear a clip from the Premier 12.
Home of the Yomiuri Giants. And one of their aces on the mound trying to get out of a fifth inning jam here in the World Championship Final. 3-2. A ball crossed toward right field. Back goes Marishita. Gone! The captain, John Whiteside, delivers.
And that is the voice behind it. Tyler Maun is on the show. Welcome in, Tyler, once again. I think I had you on right after. Yeah, I think I had you on right after the 2023 WBC. And now we're doing it before the WBC. But that was such an awesome call. Back goes Marishita, gone! And then I'm like, oh my God, that's so awesome. Tell me, before we jump into WBC, I want to really focus on the two calls in that championship. Because I think, my opinion, when I watch the Premier 12 on the English side, there's you, and then I'm not a big commentator guru or anything, but there was another commentator.
Yeah.
But I think you and your team and John Morosi did a very good job telling how important, how substantial that moment was for Taiwan in the ninth inning and the eighth inning when we had the lead. But so you understand how we felt. Yeah, I think more than anybody. So How was that call like? What that home run when you're up 1-0, where we're expecting Japan to fight back, and then bam, it's like a not really a knockout punch, but a really substantial one in the middle of the game. What was that call like? What was the environment like at the stadium?
You know, it was one of the more unexpected and epic moments, I think, of my broadcasting career. Because, yeah, like you said, you always expect Samurai Japan to be, well, they're down a run, they're going to be fine. It's the fifth inning, they're going to be fine. But that really felt like the moment where there was almost like a little tear in the space-time continuum baseball-wise, because it was like, oh, this is very different now. The atmosphere in the ballpark was incredible. I mean, you can hear, for a home run by a visiting player in a game like that, for the level of noise to be that way in the Tokyo Dome. Obviously, there were tons of Taiwan fans there for that game, but still, in a 50,000 seat stadium, 55,000 seat stadium, there's 45 to 50,000 fans that are there for the home team, for Samurai Japan, who I think were just in shock. And the thing that I remember most about that play was when it came off the bat, you could pretty well tell that it was gone. And Shota Morishita, who I refer to in the call, he gives it a good effort, but that lands a decent way up in the seats in the outfield. So it wasn't a circumstance where you sort of feel like, all right, I have to hold the call on this until I know it's going to get out of here. Somewhat like Yu Chang's home run in the 2023 Classic, where when it came off the bat, I wasn't sure that it was going to get out, and then it got out. For the Chen home run, you could tell immediately, and it felt like everything changed from that moment with the dynamic of that game. I'll be honest with you, and I don't think I've talked about this in an interview before, but the one thing about that call, I blew the ending to that call, because I was watching Chen Wei Chen come around third, and I called his name instead of saying Che Shen Chen, because I'm watching the celebration. I'm watching the guys pour out of the dugout. And so I kind of tried to fix it by, relaying what happened in that inning, the walk, the base hit, and then the home run. But that, for me as a broadcaster, that's the thing I think about. If I play it just through, the captain, then it's a great call. And then I'm going through, I think I was just in such shock at that moment. That fumble happened. But man, it was what an incredible thing to have gotten to experience live, and to be able to have had all of my experience with Taiwanese baseball and to know what that moment and what that game meant for fans. That was probably the coolest part of all of it for me.
Yeah, and I also want to start with, I think I was briefly, very briefly, compared to you, it's like not even the same battlefield, but we'll very briefly try to be a commentator one. So I understand sometimes like you're like, oh my god, I messed up that name. But like, man, when you have a lineup of the Chen and Lin and you know what? Like one slip up every now and then. Even as a Taiwanese fan, because you're looking at the Roman translation of it. Everybody looked
right.
All the names look very similar. For me,
Right.
we're looking at the Chinese characters is different. But I understand when everything's CC Chen and a CY Chen.
That makes me feel a little bit better. All right.
yeah. But no, but I remember it was like 5 a.m. in Jersey. And so I was at first for a couple of innings. I was like, you know what? Japan's probably going to jump out to a 4-0 lead. So I'm just going to watch on my phone. And if they do, I'm going to go back to bed.
Go back to sleep.
And then the fifth inning happens. And then I was watching on my phone. I was like in the fetal position in my bed. And then the home run happens. I jump up and then I go, should I put this game now on my TV? And I go, no, I can't do that because we got the lead when I'm in the fetal position. Therefore, I have to remain. So even with the projector and like a screen and like a computer all available to me, I was watching the rest of the game in a fetal position on like I don't know, like on my phone. But the rest of the game,
hilarious.
No, it was that moment was I was like, whoa, something might happen. But every single half inning, you would in the beginning of the offensive inning for the Japanese, you're like, oh, they're gonna get on base, they're gonna put pressure on you, and then you're going to like it happens all the time with Taiwanese teams. It's a PTSD thing, and Japan was doing that against everybody in the Premier 12. Cuba, Korea, you name it, like Venezuela, USA, you name them all. So so you're like, oh, but then I was surprising to me was how anxious they looked at the plate in the 7th, 8th. It was like bam, 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 like 10 pitches, 3 outs, and then I'm like, this could happen. And then we go into now the 9th inning. Now the leadoff guy gets on base, and then again the PTSD cut starts coming out. But then you have a nice play at second that cuts down the lead runner, and then you have this double play that again your call was amazing. I'm gonna play that call right now.
Crowd begins to build for a full count offering. On the way to Coriaro, and a liner at first. That'll do it. Baseball immortality for Taiwan. Chinese Taipei has won its first ever Premier 12 World Championship.
That's the call that will live forever in Taiwanese baseball history. The Chinese version, we have like 3 Chinese versions, and then the English version as well, the official one. That call will live forever in the history of Taiwanese baseball. That will forever. But that was what was your experience and memories of that play, because that came so quick. I think the one thing we remember about that play will be like sometimes you wait for it, 2 outs, 2 strikes, everybody knows it's coming. But that play was like I was like line drive first, caught, and then everybody and then it was over. And I think for the broadcast, the Taiwanese broadcast, they're like, did we win it? Oh, we won it. And then they started celebrating. So what was your experience and memories of that play?
I think that's a very insightful, catch about that play. And as somebody who did some sports commentary yourself, I think that's probably why you get that. You don't really expect that. You don't expect a line drive double play to end it. And I don't know why. That's as likely as any other play. But you do always sort of anticipate, well, it'll go down to 2 outs, 2 strikes, whatever it is, and you'll get to build that drama. And that wasn't the case. So you have to react instinctively. And when that ball came off the bat, you just you sort of jump into it. And I think the way the energy swelled in that stadium, the guys pouring out of the dugout on the third base side to go celebrate. We had some Taiwanese fans down in front of us who were immediately just so emotional and hugging each other and crying. And you really felt the import of that moment instantly. And, this idea just kept coming into my head of how that win will live forever for Taiwanese fans. And so that was where that line came from, baseball immortality for Taiwan, because I know, like you said, how many disappointments there have been, especially at the senior level, at, the biggest international competitions for Taiwanese baseball. And there's been success at U18s, there's been success at U15s, U23s, the Little League World Series, whatever it is. But that highest level competition has always left a little bit something to be desired. And, I think for so long there was probably, and maybe there still is, a feeling in Taiwan of being sort of the little brother on the block to Japan and Korea, where it's they're winning the biggest competitions, especially Samurai Japan. And when are we ever going to have our moment? And I wanted that moment to be something that Taiwanese fans knew was as big as they felt it was. It's one thing to have your team accomplish something and think, all right, well, this is the coolest thing for us. Is everybody else going to treat it that way? And especially to be able to do it in Tokyo, to do it at the Tokyo Dome against a really, really good team. That was, to me, the thing that really stood out most was have to be able to commemorate that triumph in a way that fits just how transformative it was. And that's cool to be able to go back and relive that. It's funny because the 2019 final out for Japan was a strikeout. And to compare those two finishes, that was such a classic finish to a game where you build it to a 2-strike count late, the crowd's on its feet, everybody's into it for the home team. And, that was such an easy call you make the call and then you get out and you let the pictures tell the story. For this one, because it happened in such an unexpected way, you do try to do the same thing. You try to make the call and get out and let the pictures tell the story. But to contextualize that when it comes in a moment that probably surprises people is a little bit different task as a broadcaster. But man, I mean, what a moment. And to be able to have that lay out, watch that celebration, and then listen to JP and to Ryan Roland Smith, get to talk about what it meant was pretty awesome. And I mean, that's a moment I'll carry with me forever.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting for me because I watched all of the broadcasts that was available to me afterwards, all of the reactions. And there was a very distinctive difference between teams like yours, where you're at the dome, versus there's some that's like sitting in a studio and watching a satellite feed. And I remember for the ones that on a satellite feed, for like just their reaction was like mine. Like I didn't know what would happen until you saw the frame of people running out from the dugout. Because at first you're like, did the ball bounce? Because the ball was caught as such, like so close to the ground. Like I'm thinking it can't be real. The ball must have bounced, but then everybody started celebrating. But because you were at the dome, you saw it not just like you said. I think the play, you were closer to play, as well as the energy in the stadium, because everybody, I guess, at the stadium knew it was caught. The TV feed, that when it shifts to that, I mean, there's no disrespect, there's nothing wrong happened. It's just play just happened so fast. Nobody caught the play itself. So it's really interesting to see how your reaction was versus the ones with the satellite feed. And
I think that's an important distinction to make. And I understand that we're in an era where that's not going to stop. But doing remote broadcasts as a sports broadcaster is a horrible experience. It makes for a far inferior product, and it's difficult because it's not the broadcaster's fault. Somebody else is making that decision to keep them in a studio elsewhere watching it. The Winter Olympics going on right now. I was just reading a story about how NBC only has one hockey play-by-play team on site in Milan. Everybody else is doing games remotely. And that's
hockey
really challenging.
Such a fast sport.
Yeah. It's really challenging because there's so many things that give you context in a game that you can't see from just watching the feed. And I know they've got tons of different monitors and the technical setup is amazing and all that, but it makes for a much more difficult broadcast. And I've talked about this with broadcasters, who have done it in, different venues, have done it for different networks, whatever. We do, as broadcasters, try to make it sound seamless and try to make it sound like a really good product. But that is a far more difficult product to produce from the broadcasting side than when you're actually there. And I know, saving money and all the things that go along with those decisions for networks is probably not going to change, but the advantage to being in the stadium, watching that happen live, gives you the ability to make that call in the moment that you don't necessarily have when you're watching on TV. And you do think, well, did he trap that? Did it skip into the glove? Because I have the luxury of being able to look at an umpire and see him immediately make the out call on a line drive. Whereas if the frame is wrong on whatever live feed you're watching, you don't have that context. So that's a really important distinction in sports broadcasting.
Yeah, and when you're, because I interned 1 year at Longhorn Network, the ESPN's Longhorn Network, and a lot of broadcast, there was the COVID year where a lot of remote was happening. So they actually set up offices for people to come in. And I was just like, I saw those rooms, and at the back, they have all these backgrounds of like, I'm like, I saw that. I'm like, oh, it's so, even without watching any of it happening, I'm like, that feels so wrong. But that was during COVID and you kind of understood it. But when you're doing remotely, there's so many extra points of failure when you're a sport, when you're on the broadcasting side. If one frame cuts wrong, a tad too late, or the frame didn't get it, like you said, or even if you have 10 feeds, it's just different than seeing the entire field. Especially for baseball, because the frame might be on the relay throw, but you don't know where the runner is until, so I think that's very important, the timing of it in baseball and the hockey, I imagine, as well. It's such a fast sport. You have to, I even struggle with following the puck on TV and then let alone the broadcaster. So and then the full ninth inning of the Premier 12 finals it's actually on YouTube. And I went back and watched it during the last 15 months. I think I watched it a couple times, and it was so awesome to me that you and John Morosi and Roland Smith contextualized the fact that you hear about Taiwan all the time, like you said. In the U.S., if you talk about Taiwan, they go, "Oh yeah, they've won a bunch of like World Series, Little League World Series, whatever." No, it's such a different. Like the highest pinnacle we had before that was a silver medal finish at the Olympics, but we got crushed in the championship and stuff like that. And you're like, and you really went ahead and contextualized it. So I think that was really cool, because a lot of the international fans knows a lot about Japan. They know a lot about Korea because the KBO was on ESPN for like a year. Right. They don't know really, like you said, we're like the little brothers on the block. So it was really cool to hear you guys contextualize it. But now we move on to the WBC 2026. Last time you were on, Taiwan finished last, even though everybody was 2-2. You were there to feel the energy of all of the games. I think, understandably, there's I wish it was marketed more, especially in 2026 I think MLB does a lot about it, but for one, we're not hosting, so that makes sense. And two, it is a team that finished last in the group, so how much marketing are you really going to put on a team like that? But the WBC is such a painful tournament for Taiwan. We finished 1-2 in 2006, 0-2 in 2009. And then we finished like 2-3, and we lost to Korea, Japan in 2013, which is like the best tournament we've had. I think we had one win outside on foreign soil in the entirety of the WBC. So as much as talented as this team is, I have very bad PTSD with this team, with this tournament. Now, from the outside perspective, because you understand Taiwanese baseball very well. At the same time, you are, you are not Taiwanese. So what are your expectations on this team in this year's WBC?
I was talking about this the other day. If I had to pick two teams that are going to come out of that group, Japan, obviously, I mean, it would be a shocker of unprecedented proportions in international baseball if Japan somehow did not come out of that group and win that group. So that's, you can pretty much put Japan in pen to come out of that group. But I really do feel like this Chinese Taipei team is best prepared for that stage and for that group. And they would be my pick to be the second team coming out of that. I know Korea obviously is immensely talented. They're dealing with a lot of injuries. That roster has been reshaped a lot in recent weeks with guys who have had to pull out because of injuries. Australia is going to be an interesting one. They've got some really good high-level young talent. Travis Bazzana obviously is the guy who sort of leads the charge for that squad, the first overall pick in the 2024 MLB draft. Czechia, I love that program. Everybody does. They're sort of the darlings on the international stage. They've got a lot of guys who have played together for a really, really long time, and I think they can make some surprise moments happen, but it would be a shocker if they advance past the first round. It'd be really cool for international baseball, but to me, I think that group is Japan and then Taiwan, and a mix of those other three. And the reason I say that is because no other international baseball program has the high level experience of these guys from Taiwan in the last 16 months. And that is, I think, a massive asset for this team. I know how talented that Korea team is going to be, the Australia team, the Czechia team. There's a lot of good baseball that's going to be played, but none of those teams won the second biggest international competition in baseball 16, 18 months ago, and then followed it up with a qualifier for the WBC 5 months after that. That's, I think, the biggest portion of this to me. It would be one thing if Chinese Taipei wins Premier 12 and a year and a half later they're playing in the WBC. But the fact that they had that intermediate stage where they had to qualify for this WBC on home soil last year, that is such a different component to this because they rolled out an entirely different roster, basically.
Yeah.
And so now they've had these two teams that they could pick from. And I remember, in our conversations with Hao Ju-sung before the start of the qualifier, he said, this is risky. Like, we know this is risky, but we feel like this gives us the best shot to have the best team possible to go for the 2026 Classic, to have a veteran-laden group for Premier 12, a really, really young group for the WBC qualifier, and try to pick the best out of those two teams to go on to the Classic in 2026. No one else has had that luxury.
Yep.
I do very much empathize with the PTSD feeling for Taiwanese fans. I'm wearing a sweatshirt of my university, the University of Nebraska. We were the sports, the football powerhouse in America when I was a kid, and we've been terrible for 25 years almost.
Yeah.
And it's the same sort of deal where you just feel like even when something good is in progress, you feel like, well, this isn't going to last. I'm going to be miserable by the end of this game. And generally that's true. So I get that feeling, but I will say for Taiwanese fans, these athletes are not, they're not of the generation that saw the worst struggles. And so they shouldn't be burdened by those problems. And I know that's difficult. I know that the ghosts of the past in sports rear their heads in a lot of different ways. But to me, the 2023 team, even though they didn't advance, like you said, they went 2-2. They had chances to make a different fate for themselves if they win against Cuba on that last day. If they don't show up flat early on in that event, there's a potential for them to move on. But they played pretty well in a lot of stretches in that event. And I think they took the lessons from that. They applied them in Premier 12. They applied them in the qualifier. And now this is just a group that I think they've already dealt with the pressure. They had the slow start to the qualifier last year, and they responded to that to make it into the WBC. They went on the road to the Tokyo Dome, and they beat Japan in a winner-take-all final a few months before that. So this is not the same team that has had all of those struggles. They've built a culture of winning over the last 18 months. And I think that is a massive component to being successful in tournament baseball. It may not play out that way, but you can't look at this Chinese Taipei team and think that they did not do everything possible to try to get to that second round and maybe make a surprise run beyond that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. You mentioned I think the stretch, the off-season stretch after 2024, before 2025, like the Premier 12 WBCQ, no other country in the, no other country has had that level of talent depth throughout the country, but having to be tested by these two very high level, like Spain, Nicaragua, South Africa. You can talk about how they had help from the fact that the nationality rules are so relaxed. But if you put them in the Premier 12 and the WBCQ, which is not supposed to be on the same level of tournaments, they wouldn't nowhere close to be in the same level in both tournaments. Same as Japan. Like Japan, Korea, they don't have to play in both because in theory, if you're a country that's that good in baseball, you shouldn't have to play in the qualifier. But Taiwan is kind of like in that middle part, like like in that very awkward spot where you have to play in both at that particular offseason. And it's a very unique experience. I think not as much for the players because, like you said, the players are totally different from both tournaments. And to be honest, for this WBC, it's a very different roster from either because you have a lot of players from the minor league systems that didn't play in either tournament. But it's a very good experience for the coaches because I remember like we tried to budget the pitchers in the WBCQ, and that really bit us in the rear end in the first game. We tried to throw out like the depth guys, which I don't think they're a B team because there were so many dropouts. That's why so many young players came in, but you weren't like it's really difficult to budget a WBC tournament because of the pitch limit and everything, and that's what bit us in the 2023 WBC, and then 2025 WBCQ. So it'll be interesting to see how they now approach this 2026 one because we do have talent like we've never had in terms of pitch velocity and the 95, 96, but there's the pitch limit there, not only from the tournament side, but from the minor league team or the major league organizations that they put on. So it'll be interesting to see. And that's why I'm always scared because you have to attack the zone. Everybody knows you have to attack the zone in WBC because of the pitch limit. So it's just hitting and hitting. Like hitting is at a premium. Pitching is at a premium because hitting becomes easier because everybody has to pound the zone. I think that's what makes that's one of the reasons why we're better in the Premier 12s because we can send a guy out there to throw 7 innings and 85 pitches, but we can't do that in the WBC. And it's very it's really interesting that you brought up the WBCQ roster, how it's a younger team, but that team had Yu Chang. That team had Wu Nianting, like the guy coming from Japan. They had the son of dragons, Shiroshi. Like that team is still very good. It's just the depth isn't there because of a lot of the dropouts. But I agree with that strategy because as much as these guys are baseball players, in my opinion, they are professional baseball players, not national team players. We're just not like the Soviet Union where you're training for 18 months just for that one tournament. So I understand why they don't want to overstretch the guys to play 2 tournaments in one offseason. But yeah, that was a very interesting offseason. And I think the WBCQ needed to happen for Taiwan because we were riding at such a high after the Premier 12. And a lot of the new fans are like, oh, we're like invincible. We have this shield. And then first game out there, you almost got mercy ruled by a Spanish team. You're like, what? So it's a really nice wake-up call. And then as much as we look back and see that was a great tournament, we still had to remember that Spain at the very last, like the knockoff game or like the playoff game, Spain had game-winning runs on base in the seventh in the 7th inning, and you're like, and it was bases loaded, it was a two-run game, and then there's either 1 out or nobody out, and then Swingley comes in and saves the day. We were that close from sitting at home, and I told my friends I do not know what I would do to myself if we didn't qualify. Like how embarrassing that would have been. And how weird that would be for the WBSC too, because the team just won your premier tournament,
your biggest event,
got knocked out. Yeah, you can't play in the biggest event because you got knocked out in the qualifier. So I think the WSC kind of had a sigh of relief, and then Taiwan had a sigh of relief as well. I think as interesting as the battle for second place in Pool C, it'll be very interesting to see who finishes last.
Yes,
because as we think that the Czech team is probably the least talented, like you said, they played a lot of teams over the last 3 years. Trying to in preparation for this, they played Taiwan in the end of 2024. before the Premier 12, and they played Japan, and I think they held a tournament in Czech. Well, they played a bunch of teams.
Yeah.
So they're a very well tuned machine, because they know that their number one task is to not have to play a qualifier for the 2029 tournament. So it'll be interesting to see Australia now face off against the Czech Republic, and then I don't think it's going to happen, but like you said, Korea's injuries really puts a damp on I think not just their chances, but their morale. And I think I half jokingly telling my Korean friends, like, this is the same story as the Taiwanese Premier 12 team. We had a bunch of dropouts, and we won the championship. So there's no guarantee that you guys are just going to finish third or fourth. At the same time, I think it's a very high ceiling, but a very low floor. And that'll be very, very interesting. So, I wonder what thoughts you have about Australia and Korea and the Czech, because Australia has a lot of top-end talent, but the depth is always a question. WBC is all about depth because of the pitch limit. Korea as well. Now we're testing the talent pool of Korean baseball, like similar to our previous offseason. So what do you think about I don't want to say it's not the last three, but obviously we know about Taiwan, we know about Japan, but what about the other three teams in Pool C?
Yeah, I mean, I think the odds on top team among that group is Korea, but like you said, I mean, this is going to be a very different looking roster coming in than what was initially announced, and that is worrisome for Korea. They haven't made it past the first round, I think, since 2009, which is kind of a shocker. They are, such a proud and talented baseball country. And the crazy thing about Korea is right now, baseball is more popular in Korea than it's basically ever been. The KBO is shattering attendance records, and TV ratings are crazy and all that, but they have not had a lot of success on the international level lately. They've struggled at the younger tournaments, U23s, U18s, U15s, and the national team, the senior level national team, was not, the Premier 12 squad, the WBC teams in recent years. Even with the amount of talent, they have not felt like the heavyweight that they should be. And that could very well change this time around. And I think it's a really good point that they are similar to the build of that 24 Premier 12 team when you're trying to construct a roster in Taiwan, and all of a sudden you're looking around at all the guys who can't play. And, it's funny because Hao Ju-sung, I remember him telling us, all anybody said when we put together that Premier 12 roster is we're cooked. Like, this team is going to get crushed. Then they go win the whole thing. So, that's to quote kind of a meme quote over here, that's baseball, Susan. And you go into these events and they're just so different from regular season baseball. They're so different from playoff baseball. You're not playing in a series, you're playing in a short tournament format. That's what I love about the Classic, is that anything can happen. I do think Korea is still they are the other team that's going to be in that mix to make it through to the second round. Australia, like you said, depth is the issue with Australia. They do have a lot of really, really good young talent. Travis Bazzana obviously is the guy that everything, is going to kind of roll through for that team. They've got other guys who you look at and you can be really excited about. Curtis Mead, who has spent some time in the big leagues with the Tampa Bay Rays. Rickson Wingrove, who was a big power prospect in the Philadelphia Phillies organization for a little while and has since, found his way into different pathways in baseball. Even their pitching staff, the young guys on the pitching staff, I think are really exciting. Cohen Wynn, who's pitched in the KBO, Kai Hampton, Jack O'Loughlin. They do have some guys who I know they were excited to hopefully get on this team who were not allowed to play either by their universities or their major league organizations. They have some older guys who have been around forever. I mean, guys who have played in World Baseball Classics going back over a decade, whether it's Todd Van Steensel or Tim Kennelly or the veteran voices who have been part of this and maybe in their last go round. That can work one of two ways. I think on the one hand, you have the there can be a difficult generational gap sometimes on teams where the older guys are carrying the burden of the struggles in past editions and are not able to relate necessarily as well to the younger guys. But on the flip side of that, and this is probably the case for Australia, that's such a good culture with that group. David Nielsen and his coaching staff, they're so professional. They do such a good job of just getting those guys on the same page. They're already in Japan, getting ready, playing exhibition games and doing all the things that it takes to prepare. That I think being able to mix the struggles that team has had in the past with similarly to this Taiwan group, not necessarily at the same level, but a lot of young guys who are not beholden to those struggles of 2013, 2017, whatever it is. This is an Australia team that was a game away from making it to the semis last time out. And so there are a lot of good things for them to build on there. And then this Czechia team, the thing about the Czechs is even though the upper level talent is not yet at the same level of Korea, Japan, Taiwan, even Australia, to a certain extent, with the upper echelon guys on the Australia squad like Travis Pizzana. The Czech guys have played together for so long, and so many of these guys who are going to be on this roster are on this roster. They were on the roster in 2022 when they qualified in Regensburg for the 23 Classic. They were on the Classic roster in 23, when they rallied to beat China. Martin Mužick, who hit that big home run, the Mužick Magic call from Stephen Nelson. He's there. Wojtek Menšík, Daniel Padishak, all these guys who have had their big moments on these big stages, they're going to be there again. And so even though I think talent-wise, you probably look at Czechia as their fifth of five in that group, the fact that they've all played together for so long, that is sort of an X factor that I think puts them in the running to be the shocker of that group. I don't know if they'll make it out of the first round, but it would not surprise me at all if the Czechs qualify for what'll that be by that point? 2030 for the next Classic. If they qualify by sneaking a win over Australia or over Korea or somebody. So I think that's the exciting thing about this group is out of the four teams that are not Japan, there are a lot of really compelling storylines of there is a team that I think is probably the favorite to move on. But any of those other teams could really make some noise and could really have a very fun tournament. And again, all it takes is if you go out and you play great on day one and you can carry that through the next 4 days, that's what tournament baseball provides, is the ability to get hot at the right time and surprise some people. And that can change the course of lives. For Pavel Hadim, who's the manager of that Czechia squad, or for somebody like Todd Van Steensel, a veteran on the Australia team, or for these guys from Korea who are desperately trying to get their team back to the stage that it deserves on the international map, there are huge opportunities coming up. And that's what's really, really cool in the WBC is if you get hot, you can create some legendary memories and moments over the span of a 5-day stretch of time. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think thinking back, I think Korea in WBC, I think Taiwan, Korea, the traditional powerhouses of international baseball outside of the WBC really gets because of the nationality rules, we struggle a lot in the WBC. And I think by now, after Korea's, I don't want to say disappointing because I'm not a Korean, but like you look at how they performed in 2013, 2017, 2023, I think you can now say that the tournament has not been kind to Korea since 2009, just like they are with us. But at the same time, you look at the Premier 12, they were in the same preliminary group as Japan and Taiwan, which finished 1 and 2. Right. They gave up a 6-run inning in the second inning against Taiwan, but then they won the rest of the game 3-0. Like it was a 6-3 game. So that was like, barring those 2 homers between Taiwan and Korea, who knows what would happen, right? So they're still as results wise as disappointing as you can say. The process is still very close. Now, 2023 WBC, they got ambushed by Australia. And that happens all the time when you're trying to budget guys, just like what we tried to do against Panama. I think what Taiwan needs to watch out against Australia is as much depth problems as we think they have. Not depth problems, but the lack of depth, which will cause a problem for them. Taiwan's opener is against Australia. We're facing their very best. And Australia knows if they want any shot at the second place, they have to beat Taiwan. So they will send their very best in game one. So that's that is one that Taiwan needs to focus on as well. And then you look down, like we played the Czech Republic like 10 hours after against Japan. If somebody wakes up on the wrong side of the pillow, what would have happened? So you're still looking at scenarios where Taiwan's not going to cruise. At least like you're not going to say, oh yeah, we're going to qualify for 29. Like this pool is not deep enough. This bad stuff can still very much happen, and that is where my PTSD comes out from the Team Taiwan experience in the WBC. Now you're calling games in Pool A. Pool A, I think, is a very, very interesting pool because. Look at Pool A is Puerto Rico, Panama, Cuba, Canada, and Colombia. Pool B is United States, Mexico, and then Italy, Great Britain, Brazil. Pool C we just discussed. Pool D is Venezuela, Dutch, Dominican, Israel, Nicaragua. I think outside of Pool C, out of the three groups, I would say Pool A is the deepest, and in my opinion, the group of death. Some people say Group D is because you do have the Dutch, who's traditionally very good in the WBC.
Yeah.
You have the Dominican Republic, you have Venezuela. Israel's like the USA 2 team, right? And then Pool B, you have Italy, which is also obviously very strong as well in the WBC, and then Mexico, United States. But Pool A, I mean, Puerto Rico, who are the host, and they're really taking a big hit on their roster because of insurance issues. Panama, who ambushed Taiwan in the previous tournament. Canada, Cuba, Colombia. All five, I mean, if you take away Panama as well, all four of teams are crazy, have a really good history, and Colombia have to climb out of the qualifier as well. It's a very interesting group. Again, before this podcast, I told you that to me, I play half-court tennis with international tournaments. I look at Taiwan, maybe Korea, maybe Japan. That's it. I don't really know anything about Pool A besides Puerto Rico's. Lindor can't play because of insurance issues, and Javier Baez can't play. Walk us through about Pool A, because that's a very interesting group, I think, in the WBC.
I think you're right. I think it's the group of death. The thing that excites me most about it is I think that is the group that has the highest probability of the same level of. We started calling Pool A in 2023 the group of chaos, the pool of chaos, because everybody finished 2 and 3. We had to go to tiebreakers, and I still remember to this day my producer from MLB Network, Chris Bracey, who's become one of my really good friends. It was after day 2, I think, maybe day 3 of that group in 2023. And Brace walked up to me and Ryan Rowland-Smith, and he said, there exists the possibility that everybody in this group can finish 2 and 2. And the second he said that, I thought, oh, that's definitely going to happen now. The fact that the way that group had felt, knowing that was a possibility, just seemed like, oh, everybody here is too balanced. That's the way this is going to go. And honestly, I think that could happen this year as well. I think if the roster situation had not impacted Puerto Rico the way that it has, Puerto Rico, I think, is the odds-on favorite to roll through that group with Correa and Lindor and Baez and all those guys. That being what it is, and those guys not being on the roster, makes it a very different looking group for Puerto Rico. They obviously still have the benefit of being at home. And I mean, Puerto Rico's baseball talent is still insane. So I think, I'm not going to make predictions for that group since it's my group, but Puerto Rico obviously is, they're still, I wouldn't blame anybody who says, all right, well, they're still at home. They're going to roll through that group. They are very fun. But outside of Puerto Rico, everybody else is really fun too. Canada doesn't have Freddie Freeman, but this is the best roster that Canada has ever assembled for a World Baseball Classic. They've got the Naylor brothers. They've got some pitching depth. They've got Owen Casey. They've got Edouard Julien. They've got Denzel Clark, who last year, before he got injured, was one of the most exciting players in baseball. I actually got to see him for the AAA National Championship game when he was playing for the Las Vegas Aviators on sort of a rehab assignment. So Canada is as well positioned to make a run as they've ever been. And the thing that's coolest about that is, we talked a little while ago about how baseball is having such a moment in Korea. Baseball is obviously having a moment in Taiwan. Baseball is really having a moment in Canada. And that's very fun and very exciting. I've already heard from fans that I have, or friends that I have in Canada, who are fans of that team, who are traveling to Puerto Rico to go to those games. And that is something that, I think if you're talking about the 2017 Classic, that might not be the case. There might not be that level of enthusiasm, but the success of Baseball Canada and developing all this talent, and to be honest, the success of the Blue Jays, going to the World Series, taking the Dodgers to 7 games, that is something that I think has really ignited the passions of baseball fans in Canada. So that's great. Colombia trucked everybody in that qualifier down in Tucson. Yeah. They're going to be ready to go. A very talented roster, veteran guys. They are a team that has been there before in so many ways. When you can give the ball to Jose Quintana in game 1 and have a major league veteran, a guy who, at one time in his career was a top 10, top 5 starting pitcher in baseball, that is as good as you can ask for in a short tournament format. So Colombia is going to be ready to go. Cuba is still, even given Cuba's struggles in the last decade or more, that's the greatest international baseball program to ever exist. Cuba won gold or silver in every single major international competition from like the 1950s through 2008 in Beijing. I mean, they were incredible. That team is going to be, they've got a high hill to climb. There's not, if you could pool all of the best Cuban baseball players in the world, they are as good as anybody else who's going to be taking part in this event or any other. The problem is that doesn't happen. They still have a lot of talent, but obviously there are so many different things at play in assembling a roster for Cuba that I'm not sure how this team is going to be. But again, short format, if you can get the right guys going early on, they've got some really, high leverage arms, guys who can pitch in really crucial spots, guys who have pitched, whether it's in Major League Baseball or minor league baseball in the United States, in Korea, in Japan, Livan Moinello, Yariel Rodriguez, Frank Alvarez, who's a guy who I saw in the U23 World Cup really recently. Raidel Martinez is another one. They just have a lot of arms that if you need one out late in the game, if Cuba is trying to finish off, a win over Puerto Rico, let's say, and you have the ability to hand it to Livan Moinello or, Raidel Martinez, some of these guys who can go 98, 101, that's major league caliber stuff that they can still rely on to finish out games. And then Panama, Panama is a really, really good group. That squad has assembled, I think, their most talented roster for a WBC. They didn't have to go through the qualifiers, which is huge. And to be a team that can build off of making it through the qualifiers on home soil in 2022, having some success in 2023, building a group that has played together and has the experience of being on this stage. That Panama team, I think, is one of the most balanced of the 5 that are in that group. So it's fun because you go into that group and there isn't, Group B with the United States and Mexico, that's a heavyweight group. And you sort of know those are probably the 2 that are coming through. The DR and Venezuela are likely the 2 coming out of that group in Florida. But like you said, the Netherlands, every year in the Classic, the Netherlands go out and they shock somebody. And they're already over there in Florida getting ready for their group. So those groups all have, I think, a clear-cut tier system where it's all right, these are the likely finishers that are going to win it. These are maybe the wild cards, and these are the teams that are probably headed for relegation in the qualifiers. Group A does not have that. I don't think you look at a single team in Group A and think, oh, they're really going to struggle, or a single team in Group A and think, well, they're just going to crush everyone. And that's the most exciting part about it for me as a broadcaster, certainly. And I like to think that maybe they gave me and Ryan Rowland Smith that assignment because we brought so much of the lunacy and the chaos to Taichung in 2023, and maybe we can replicate some of that. But that's the most exciting thing about Group A.
Yeah, and because you look at Pool B and D, right? Like like I was just looking up like how did Colombia end up having to play a qualifier, and they got ambushed by the British team, and then
Right.
having to play like a survival game against the United States. I think that sort of a story will play out in Pool B and D, where yes, the top two are going to be the top two, or maybe there's going to be a third team that challenges them, but there's no guarantee that Italy, with the talent that they have, could be ambushed by like the British team, because they have talent. I mean, they almost got Aroldis Chapman. Like, what are we doing here? And then Pool D, you look at the Dutch, which I think they've historically been very good with the WBC, but they had Xander Bogaerts, Didier Gregorius, Jonathan Scope. That group has been playing together since 2009,
right?
And now they're kind of still relying on the same group. So you could argue that how has their is that team on their last leg? Are they running on fumes? You just don't know. And then you go up against an Israeli team which shocked everybody in 2017, beat the heck out of Taiwan, beat the home team in Korea in 2017, and then Nicaragua. I mean, they beat Taiwan pretty handsomely in the qualifier, albeit for Taiwan at the time, it was more of a, we had to play the knockout game anyway, so just finish this game. But Nicaragua is nothing to be, it's I think it's in the story for the last place for Pool B and D are very interesting. For Pool A is the opposite, where who finishes? Maybe Puerto Rico's up there, but again, we know that they have their armor isn't as strong as we think it will be. And then Cuba. I mean, imagine if Cuba has to play the qualifier. Like, nobody would ever imagine that. If you tell people like 10 years ago, Cuba might be having to play a qualifier. You just don't know. So it'd be very interesting in Pool A. Colombia, Julio Turan, Jose Quintana, those are the kind of pitchers that they have, they're from Colombia. This is not just like a random Latin American team in baseball. They're very good too. So that team is so deep, but this pool is so deep. I think, like you said, it will be a pool of chaos, and it's very, very interesting. So, but what's interesting, I think, is the quarterfinals. Like, after this WBC is very interesting, like last time, where the beginning is so long because you have to play everybody in your pool, but the elimination bracket is so short. 3 games,
so short
maximum, so short. Like Australia, Italy, Australia and Italy. That, like, I feel like one of those teams, they flew there and they're gonna leave in 24 hours. It was the bracket is very, very interesting, and we know that Pool A will match up with Pool B, and Pool B is probably going to be U.S. Mexico. So Pool A will be very interesting in the beginning, but whoever comes out of it, they have to play probably the most top heavy pool in Pool B, and that will be, I don't know, it'll be interesting, because I remember Cuba they beat Australia, which I was salivating the fact that if we had beaten Cuba, we play Australia. And historically, Taiwan has never had problems playing Australia, knock on wood. And then we might be in Miami, but then Cuba gets killed by the U.S. in the semifinals. And I remember watching that game. By the 5th inning, I wanted to turn the TV off, because it was like we lost.
They just ran out of gas.
Yeah. It was like, oh, we lost to Cuba pretty handsome, like pretty dumb. We got dominant, kind of. It wasn't a really competitive game. And then that team that we lost to got killed by the U.S. Like, how far were we? The quarterfinal, semifinal, championship structure is it's interesting, but also it's very WBC-esque. It's very much it's excitement, and then it's also with the blink of an eye, it's over. So. What are your predictions for the knockout? Because it's a very interesting format. It's very unpredictable, but it kind of also feels like college football, where you think everything's unpredictable, but then the talent just wins at the end. What are your predictions?
The thing that I think is always the most exciting about the WBC, and I'll say exciting. I don't know if fans of these countries would feel this way, but for example, the fact that the DR got bounced so early last time out. It's been a while since we've seen Venezuela in the Final Four. The Netherlands has made its surprise runs. There always seems to be one of those stories, if not more. You mentioned Israel back in 2017. There always seems to be at least one story every year that turns into the shocker of the tournament. And that is the coolest part of it to me. It's not, early on, after the creation of the World Baseball Classic, you heard this a lot. You don't hear it as much anymore, but people who, especially in the U.S., would talk down about it and say, well, it's not real baseball. It's a tournament that's not, I don't really care about these tournament things and blah, blah, blah. And that's true. It's not the baseball that people are used to, but it's a cool, different version of baseball. And I don't know why anybody would be down on watching more of something that you love. I never hear anybody talk that way about the Olympics or the World Cup. And so that, I think, is something that is sort of fallen by the wayside with people realizing over the last, 2 editions, especially the Classic, of just how special this event is.
Yes.
But that's the most exciting thing to me, is those stories that are the shocker stories. Yes, the odds are that this is going to be a Japan-US final. But in a short format, all it takes is one pitching staff that just figures it out. And if you're the guys in that room for a semifinal game or a quarterfinal game against Japan or the United States, you've got a starter that goes out and gives you, 6 solid innings, and you find yourself with a 1 or 2 run lead, all you got to do is piece together those final 3 innings against a great team, and you can make your way into the semis or into the final or whatever it is. That, I like that is the way that this event operates. I like that there exists the possibility of Cinderella stories. I sort of miss living in the world where people everywhere cheered for the underdog all the time. Those are the greatest stories in sports history to me. I am exhausted by the Colin Cowherds of the world who just want the Cowboys and the Yankees and whoever. I want the stories of the teams that everything is stacked against having success. That's why it was exciting calling the Czechs win in Regensburg in 2022 or Taiwan's win in Tokyo in 2024. The stories that people don't expect are the most exciting and fun stories. That's the coolest thing about the Classic to me, is that you can find these players who make legends out of themselves in the blink of an eye. And that's what we all dream about. When you're a kid and you're playing sports, or when you're growing up cheering for your team, that's the thing that you dream of. And so, like I said, I mean, the odds are that it's going to be a U.S.-Japan final. Things are sort of stacked that way just in terms of how these rosters are constructed. But would it shock me if Mexico makes the final this time around? No, not at all. Would it shock me if we see a Chinese Taipei run to the semis? No, not really. That's a team that won the second biggest tournament in international baseball less than a year and a half ago. And I do think that there exists the possibility that we have one of those teams that really just comes out of nowhere. You mentioned Nicaragua. That team was really good. They were really, really good in that qualifier. Colombia was the same way. Colombia looked like a team that had, you mentioned college football earlier. Colombia looked like a team that was playing non-conference games against FCS schools in that qualifier. Right. And that is that was not their A team. That was a team that was comprised of, it was a good roster, but they didn't have all of their big league guys. And they still went out and just destroyed that pool, that qualifying group in Tucson. So there are very few teams that I look at and think they're going to really struggle in this tournament, in this group. There are a lot more teams that I think I could see things breaking the right way and seeing that team make a run to Houston or to Miami or whatever. And that's the best part of the Classic to me.
Yeah. And I think you and I were very familiar with international baseball. A lot of the WBC Twitter is very familiar with international baseball. Taiwan is becoming that favorite dark horse team, which I feel uncomfortable being, because for one, we don't really deserve it, because we have like 1 win outside of our soil in the history of the WBC. And 2, I talked about, I spent a whole hour and 20 minutes in my previous podcast. If you want to go, it's all about like, if we had beaten Panama, how did we lose to Israel and the Dutch in 2017? It was all about like the PTSD that I've been having. It was like a therapy session with myself. But Taiwan is that I think it's becoming a sexy dark horse pick, which I think I would feel more comfortable with just a regular dark horse team. I don't want to be a sexy dark horse team. But that being said, if we do finish second, hopefully we do, we have to go up against either the top of Pool D, which is probably going to be the DR or Venezuela, and probably But I will say, as a Taiwanese fan, when we get to the quarterfinals, I'm happy. Like I don't really care what happens. And at that point, Taiwan's playing with house money, and at that point, it's like, okay, what can happen? Nothing. You don't have the budget anymore. It's one game at a time. So Taiwan is a very interesting. It's in a very interesting situation. I'm still just like, please just beat Australia. If we beat Australia, everything. All the plan for the pool, if we lost to Korea, I'll be okay. At least we finished third. When was the last time we finished middle of the pool?
Yeah.
Never since 2013, and once in the history of the WBC. So I'm still very much in the, like, I just posted the meme yesterday of like the Taiwan and WBC is like a drug to me, where like, I know it's going to hurt me. I know it's going to hurt me. It's just... But it's just, you can't not get excited about it. But every time you think about it, it's like, oh, remember when we almost got mercy ruled against Panama at home? Remember when we lost to China? Like, no disrespect to China, but like, how did we lose to China in 2009?
Yeah, right.
And then and how we never, I think we never beaten Korea in the WBC. We always lost. Our best team so far in 2013, we finished 2-3, losing to Korea and Japan. Now that Japan game was an all-time classic, but it was still a loss to us. So it's a very PTSD-esque tournament for me. It's never been kind to us. I just want 2 wins, and that's really all I can hope for. Before I let you go, Tyler, normally what we do at the end of interviews is we do a thing called FaceTime, which is what I stole from my college TV show when I was in college TV. Where we give the guest unlimited amount of time to talk about one topic. It can be a rant. It doesn't have to be a rant. And it can be about baseball. It doesn't have to be about baseball. But it can just be anything that you want to talk about. During COVID, some people are talking about like masks. A lot of times they just pick. I think somebody else very. Passionate about indie baseball was talking about indie baseball. So anything you want to talk about, you have the floor for the unlimited amount of time that we have.
I think the topic that I will hit on is specifically for Taiwanese fans, and I think it's just letting yourselves lean into the hope of this event. I'm so familiar with that feeling of being snake bitten, being cursed. Always waiting for the other shoe to drop with your favorite team. But by the same token, the point of sports, the point of all of this is to lean into that feeling of hope. And it will hurt if it doesn't go your way. And that's the way sports are. And that's tough sometimes. But if you look at it from the standpoint of that Premier 12 team, if you were going into that event thinking, well, we're just going to be crushed and it's going to be embarrassing and we're all going to hate it, I think there are moments of the embrace of the excitement and the happiness in that experience that get lost because you're always waiting for the worst thing to happen. There is so much to be cynical about in the world right now. There is so much that is frightening in the world right now. There is a lot of darkness in the world right now. And one area where we all get to escape that is sports. And when you have all of the things that are building in the right direction, like you do in Taiwan, for the success of your top level team, your heroes that you send out onto the biggest stage and hope will find success, there is no greater feeling than being in that moment with them in the way that they are, where you got no blinders on, you are open to the possibility of happiness, and it might not go that way. And you do have to be also open to the possibility of hurt. But if it goes right, there's no feeling like that. And for fans who were there in the Tokyo Dome in 24, I don't think I've ever seen fans emotional in that way because their team won. And that's what sports do. That's the most beautiful thing about sports, is that they make you feel those things. And so I would encourage fans in Taiwan to lean into that. And I know it's hard. I know it's a scary thing. If for another college football reference, if my team were to make the college football playoff these days, I would be on the edge of throwing up from the anxiety of, well, how are we going to get embarrassed on the national stage?
Right.
But by the same token, I would want to be there for every moment of it. And I would wear that on my sleeve, because that's what it's all about. It might not go your way, but you will be happier and prouder of having gone through the experience eyes wide and open to the possibility of happiness than if you go into it thinking, well, this is going to be terrible. So that would be my challenge. And, it's not just a challenge for fans in Taiwan. I think that's a challenge for, Australian fans, I think, are largely the same way of, well, we're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. This isn't going to go our way. For the countries that are in these pools that are really, really stacked, that may not have much of a shot. If you're a fan of Italian baseball, I know you're probably a little bit frustrated with how the roster was constructed, or you're frustrated with the fact you have to play in Group B or whatever it is. Your team is still there. You've still got the chance to get one or two really good days and shock everybody and move on the way you did in 2023. That's what sports are there for. Sports are there for us to forget about everything else and to be open to the possibility of happiness. And we lose sight of that a lot, I think, in this era of just existing. It's an exhausting time to be alive as human beings. And that's the best thing that we can get out of an event like the Classic, is the reality that for 3 hours every day for a couple of weeks in March, you get to watch your team play in something that means more than just their day-to-day, whether it's they're playing for the Fubon Guardians or they're playing for the New York Mets.
Yeah.
This is something that's different. And that would be my urging to fans in Taiwan and everywhere is let yourself feel the happiness of an event like this. And if it doesn't go your team's way, that's sports, and that sucks. But
Yep.
Stick with it. You can watch the way that it goes for the Cinderella story that might not be you. If it's like when the Netherlands made it onto the second round in 2009, or the Czech run in the qualifiers in 22, or whatever it is. Those stories, even if it's not your team, you can find happiness in the stories of the teams that are experiencing that. Maybe if they're the ones that don't come out of your group, because I know it's hard to cheer for the teams
exactly.
you're in the group with. But but that's what I would say is let yourself feel that happiness. Let yourself be immersed in that pool of the possibilities of what can come, and go with that feeling, because it's pretty incredible if you can get to that point where you were there all along, and then you get to celebrate something incredible with your team. There is no better feeling than that.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that you compared the Guardians with the Mets. That's the exact comparison I use when I try to explain. Like they're in New York, they're in Taipei, but the pain is the same way. The pain is the same way. Like, high expectation preseason, and then 2 months in, you're like, oh, next year on to 2027 we go. But it's very, very cool. And you're a big college football guy. I always compare Taiwan, Korea, Japan with, and I think you appreciate this, Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M.
Okay, I could definitely see that.
Texas, Oklahoma, Taiwan is Texas, Oklahoma are your Japan and Korea. You can debate which one is which. Either way, either team has programs, and teams have really good successes. And you have like the A&M team, where it's like you have all the money in the world, you have the backyard of Texas, and you've never won one since 1939. Now we won one finally in 2024, and Taiwan did. And it's the first one, which is always special. But man, like you talk about the talent that we've had, and I'm a Texas fan, so I love A&M being miserable. But at being a Taiwanese fan, you're like, oh man, like you have all the talent, you have the structure, you have the foundation. But they call it the battered Aggie syndrome. We have the same thing. It's just a different team. So I really appreciate that, because you have to look on the bright side. And there's always the hope. Sometimes when you hope more, you get disappointed more. So you don't want to control it. But if you don't hope enough, Yeah.
There's a brilliant line in Ted Lasso, and I'm not sure if it was written for that show. I would assume that it came from elsewhere before, but the line is, "It's the hope that kills you," and
Yes.
I mean, that's it. That's what it is for
Yeah.
sports fans, regardless. But by the same token, if you don't have that hope, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the
Exactly.
point in
Yeah.
being a fan if you're going to go in? And I'm not somebody who is always optimistic about things, but when it comes to sports, it just feels like if you have that opportunity to go in with the enthusiasm and the optimism and the happiness of, oh, this could be great, you're cheating yourself out of something.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who does that with my own teams. I struggle a lot of times to feel like, oh, this could go right, because it generally doesn't for my teams. But to be honest, it generally doesn't for everybody's teams, unless you were a Boston sports fan from 2004 to 2001 to 2018 or whenever. It doesn't generally go your way.
Right.
But the beauty of sports is every single new edition is a chance to turn it all around, and for Taiwan, for this Chinese Taipei program, they've been building toward this, not just since Premier 12 or since the WBCQ, but the 2019 U18 Baseball World Cup, the successes that they had, I think learning from the 2013 and 2017 classics. They have been building toward this moment, and now it's here. And it may not be the glory of the 24 Premier 12, but they have done everything possible to get to a stage where you think, all right, they're prepared for this. And that's all you can ask for as a fan.
Yeah, that's very true. And again, the first of many in the Premier 12, and just kind of, I think also important to, because there's a lot of new fans in Taiwan now, and you're like, oh, we're the champions, we should be good, and then you're like, no, the history shows otherwise. But thank you so much, Tyler, for coming on the show. It's really, every time you come on, I really had a lot of fun. Hopefully I can catch you after the WBC too, because I think Pool A will be amazing, and then we'll see if Taiwan makes it even just 2 wins. Can we just get 2 wins? Maybe just 2. And thank you again, Tyler, for coming on, and we'll see you guys next time.